Alright, what's going on, guys, and welcome back. So with the reveal of the Switch 2 that has been rumored for a long time, I figured there was no better time than the present to talk about which games in the monster taming genre would greatly benefit and or are very likely to be coming out on this console. Now, obviously, since the console itself was just revealed, none of these are confirmed, but I definitely think there's a very good chance a lot of these games will, in fact, get ported over, or for those that aren't out, will be coming to that platform. Unfortunately, the Nintendo Switch has had a history of being an underpowered system, and there are some monster taming games that perform very well on other platforms, however have issues on the Switch. So I think that most of these games would benefit like crazy. This isn't just a list of my favorite monster taming games that should be on Switch 2, but instead games that make the most sense. Anyways, let's dive in. Okay, so to start things off, we have Dragon Quest Monsters: The Dark Prince, which released on Nintendo Switch back in 2023. This is one of my favorite monster taming games, however, it does suffer from performance issues on the Nintendo Switch that are not present on the PC. I think that if we can get a more powerful version of this game on the Nintendo Switch 2, it might be able to reach a wider audience and less people will criticize it for its performance issues, especially when out in the field. Likewise, I think Shin Megami Tensei 5 Vengeance should definitely be coming out on Switch 2. I know it technically released on Switch, but this was supposed to be an upgraded version of the game, and the Switch version of SMT5 already had a ton of issues. I think that if this version of the game were to come out on the Switch 2, it could at least perform similarly to what the other platforms in which this game are present on do. Much like the Dragon Quest Monsters franchise, the SMT franchise is one of the earliest monster taming franchises that exists, and it's a shame to see that a lot of people have criticized SMT5 for its performance issues whilst only playing the Switch version when other versions exist that have far less issues. Also part of the SMT franchise, we have Soul Hackers 2, which is a spin-off of SMT and was sort of like the successor to the original Soul Hackers that came out in the 90s, though very different. This game didn't even come out on Switch because I guess they just decided the Switch wasn't worth running it. Maybe we'll get this game on Switch 2 as well. This one is kind of like a cross between SMT and Persona. It's not quite Persona, but it's not quite SMT, if that makes any sense. The Pokemon franchise, which I'm sure a lot of you guys were expecting on this list, definitely needs to start putting out games on Switch 2. I think it's pretty clear that they will be. Now the question is, will they start a new generation on Switch 2, or will they start with Legends ZA? A lot of people were expecting, for example, Black and White 2 to come out on 3DS instead of just the regular DS, but they waited for the next generation. So I'm wondering, are they going to launch ZA with the new console, or are they going to start Gen 10 on Switch 2? Now, I know technically they released Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, which was supposed to be a Gen 7 game on the Nintendo Switch, but those games are kind of like spin-offs, which, to be fair, Legends ZA kind of is as well. It's not really like a main core RPG, so maybe they will release this one on Switch 2. I definitely think that Legends did have some performance issues, despite being a good game, so I think if they were to release this one on Switch 2, it would perform much better. Now, who could talk about Pokemon without talking about Palworld? Palworld has not been confirmed on the Nintendo Switch. Obviously, it's being sued by the Pokemon Company, so I'm not exactly sure how likely it is we will ever get a Switch release, but it is on PlayStation, Xbox, and PC. Perhaps when the lawsuit is over, if both sides end up coming to some sort of agreement, maybe they will allow for Palworld to be on the Switch 2. This one, however, I think is the least likely just because of how much Nintendo is after the studio. That being said, just because a game is Pokemon-esque in nature does not stop it from coming out on Switch. We got games like Coromon and Nexomon on Switch, so who knows, maybe this one will come to Switch too. Monster Hunter Stories 2 is in a similar vein to games like SMT5, Dragon Quest Monsters, Pokemon, etc. when it comes to it having some performance issues due to the Nintendo Switch being lackluster in terms of specs. That being said, with the upgraded power we get from the Switch 2, I'm definitely hoping to see Monster Hunter Stories get a re-release, or even, who knows, maybe a sequel. There is also the first game that released on Switch as sort of a port. I don't think that one really needs to be released on Switch 2, but I could definitely see the second game requiring that a lot more. It performs a lot better on Steam than it does on Switch, so maybe we'll see this one as well. Cassette Beast is another game that on launch did have some performance issues with the Nintendo Switch, and to be honest, does not run nearly as well on Switch as it it does on Steam. Perhaps if the developers are able to re-release Cassette Beasts on to Nintendo Switch 2, or if a Cassette Beasts sequel is in the works, I definitely think that the upgraded hardware would be something that could let this game flourish a lot more. I remember when it came out on Switch, a lot of people were just dismissing it because of these performance issues, which is really sad because there's a lot going under the hood when it comes to Cassette Beasts, despite it being like a pixel art game, and it's honestly an amazing game. So if we can get it on a platform where the performance isn't as much of an issue, but it still is widespread, then I think that it'd help it reach a larger audience. Now, I could definitely see a re-release of Digimon World Next Order, or even better yet, the Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth games on Nintendo Switch 2. I think that the games honestly don't run that bad on Nintendo Switch, all things considered, but anything to get more Digimon in the hands of more people, I think is definitely a good thing. We do know that there is a new Digimon story game in the works, so perhaps that one will come out on Switch 2. And honestly, I think the Switch 2 is a great opportunity for them to capitalize on the buzz that's surrounding the new console in order to push some Digimon titles, whether they be ports from previous games that have already released or something entirely new, like I said, at least in my opinion. Now, I think this next game is very likely to be coming out on Switch 2, and that's Holy Horror Mansion, the Yokai Watch sort of Ghostcraft, as people were calling it, the spiritual successor to Yokai Watch that is still shrouded in mystery, but we know is getting an international release, and I think this is sort of Yokai Watch's attempt at making a franchise that's a little more marketable for audiences outside of Japan. We didn't get Yokai Watch 4 here. I'd obviously love to see that make its way to the West, but at the very least, I do think that this game, being the first in its new franchise, is going to really want to leave a mark on people. And if it's using outdated hardware, which, let's be honest, spec-wise, the Switch was outdated on release, then it's going to hold it back from potentially getting a good foundation for its launch. And finally, last but not least, we do have Doki V, which a lot of people, including myself, were thinking maybe the game got canceled because the devs had like essentially privated most of their videos on their YouTube channel. We hadn't heard from it in a couple years. The Twitter's been silent, but we know it is still in the works, and though it hasn't been confirmed for any specific consoles just yet, at least as of the time of recording this video, I do think that if the Switch 2 hadn't been announced, or if the Switch 2 wasn't coming, it would have been completely off the table. I don't think they would have put Doki V on Switch to begin with, but with the increased capabilities of the Nintendo Switch 2, I do think it's likely that we might get a Doki V release for it if and when that game eventually comes out. Now, all that being said, guys, we don't have the exact confirmed specs of the Switch 2, at least as of the time I'm recording this video. I've heard rumors that the specs are supposed to be somewhat comparable to a PS4 Pro. I'm not sure how accurate that is, and while that is, again, underpowered for the current generation, I definitely think that's a massive step up from what we had with the Nintendo Switch. It was so limiting for so many developers, and sure, while a lot of AAA games are going to need the latest and greatest hardware in terms of specs, I think a lot of developers can work with that level of power, especially in the monster taming genre, where a lot of these games are turn-based and don't require insane specs to begin with. All that being said, guys, which monster taming games do you think are most likely to make their way to the Nintendo Switch 2, and which games do you think need a bump in power? Don't forget to let me know down below, and make sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all things monster taming. Once we do get some confirmed titles, I'll be the first to let you know. You could also check out my Twitter, Discord, Patreon, all that fun stuff linked below, and special thanks to my supporters, especially Candy Morency, Wrathful Beast, Nemo, Chronomon, and TragSoft, and I'll see you next time. Peace.